So now what we're going to do is we're moving on to the next part of our analysis, and that is what are some assumptions and perspectives. Now, this is my favorite part because I love going like super analyzing Shakespeare for no reason. So assumptions and perspectives is where we're now going to understand what was happening at the time that led Shakespeare to craft the play in a certain manner. So we're going to analyze the stylistical features, the crafting of the play, the nature of the play, the genre of the play, all of these little itty bitty things now. So your new title in your document should be Assumptions and Perspectives. All right. And the first one that we're looking at is by far my favorite one, is a cultural assumption here, okay? And the cultural assumption is the role of meta-theater. Does anyone know what meta-theater is, or meta-theatricality? No? Oh, good, good. So meta-theta is the one word that you guys are going to use religiously in your essays when analyzing the way the play has been designed, okay? So in simple terms, what meta-theta basically means is actors inside the play, so the characters in the play, are fully aware that this is a play, like this is a theatrical performance, that they are actors, okay? So meta-theatricality is where actors inside the play are fully and consciously aware that this is a performance. We are playing a role, that I am not literally Prospero. I am taking on the role of Prospero, okay? And the way we're going to notice meta-theatricality once we start to analyze it is there are stage directions where, you know, the stage directions will be he puts on a mask, or he wears a piece of cloth, or he says to himself. There will be times where we notice that the actors are fully acknowledging the fact that they are simply actors playing a role. Okay. So for example, here it says an actor directly addressing the audience and expressing awareness that they are just performers. They are not actually the people in the play. That's what meta-theta means, is audiences being aware that they are actors and that they are not actually the real people in the play. All right. Does meta-theta make sense? Just a thumbs up. Does anyone have any questions about? Okay, good. So just write that down. As long as you guys remember that it means the actors are fully consciously aware that they are playing a role. They are playing a role. This is a facade. This is a role play activity. I am not actually the real person, okay? Right, now, more importantly, your teachers are now going to say, so yes, it's good that you guys mentioned meta-theatricality. Now, if you just wrote meta-theta in your essay, you would have probably gotten like an 80, 85%. The kids who end up getting the 90% or higher in their essays are those who go and then tell the teacher what's the effect of meta-theatricality. So we all know meta-theta means that the actors acknowledge the fact that they are actually acting. But now you need to tell your teacher what was the effect of it, okay? And the effect is very simple. Because it reminds audiences that we are actually just watching a play, our experiences become even more heightened, okay? Because what we start to realize is maybe I might be Prospero, or maybe my life is like Ariel, or I am similar to Caliban here, because these are no longer people, they are just actors. So you pretend to start taking their role in a way, okay? So what meta-theta does is it heightens the role of an audience and gets us to emotionally connect to the storyline even better. Because somewhere deep down, we might feel that we could have been one of these actors there, okay? So it creates a bit of like sympathy and empathy between the audiences. So audiences become even more involved with the plot and perhaps start to intellectually and emotionally engage with the plot, thinking that they could also be in the same scenario. So especially when we're thinking about it from Shakespeare's point of view, a lot of the women, right, let's say the daughters who are watching the play, they might feel that their life is like Miranda in the play, that they'd be like, oh, my dad doesn't let me do this, or my dad stops me from doing this. I feel like a Miranda here. Okay, or there could be like a very deformed person. I don't know, I'm not speaking out of experience. A deformed person sitting in the play, and he gets mocked in society in Jacobean England. When he's watching Caliban on stage, he might go, oh, I feel like Caliban because people mock me the same way. That's what meta-theatricality does. It creates intimacy between audiences and the roles that are on the stage. Okay. Hopefully that makes sense. Any questions there? Just to double check. Otherwise, just a thumbs up would be great, that we kind of get the idea. If anything, I forgot to let you guys know, always remember that whatever's highlighted yellow on the screen is the most important part of that slide. I forgot to let you guys know, but if it's highlighted in yellow, it's what I want you guys to write down. So please write that down. And once you've done that, we can move on to the next slide. All right, so just a thumbs up that you did write the highlighted part to make sure we can move on to the next step, okay? All right, wonderful. Now, again, like I told you guys last time as well, I won't waste your time. I'm going to be giving you guys all the examples of meta-theatricality. So on this screen is literally every single tiny detail of where we notice meta-theatricality, okay? And essentially what's going to happen is you should have all of these points in your essay to get that band 6 response, okay? So first of all, in our essay, we need to let our teacher know that one example of meta-theatricality is Skirrock's Island isn't just a random island. It's technically a stage where the entire plot plays out. So whenever you're analyzing it, don't call it just an island. It's not some imaginary spot. It's technically the stage for Prospero's plan. Second is all the characters there, like the fairies and Caliban and all the, I guess, the differences in their appearance are technically just disguises and costumes. So all the actors are wearing some kind of mask or facade or some kind of costume, which Prospero has designed for them. Okay, so if you guys have read the play, but even if you haven't, that's okay. Prospero eventually starts to play a game of that, how he would seek revenge, and he starts to move people around accordingly to his plan. So we start to realize that these are just actors who are being moved around by Prospero's plan, okay? Third point is Prospero isn't just an actor, he's also a stage manager. So he is the guy that gives orders about who goes where, who does what, who tries to kidnap who tries to fall in love with the other person. So Prospero technically also does a job of being a manager. He's managing the entire revenge plotline there, okay? But he's also an actor at the same time. And that's another example of meta-theatricality. So as I was saying to you guys earlier, how is he a stage manager? Well, he moves the characters around as though they are chess pieces to engage in his plan of revenge. But he also acknowledges the fact that he is just an actor. So in the very last lines of the play, which is what we call the epilogue, he speaks directly to the audience. And this is what he says here. You don't have to write it out, but you guys can read it as I'm talking. And essentially what he's trying to say in these lines is like, thank you so much for watching me. I was just doing a good, like, role play here of Prospero. I hope you enjoyed this entire drama. So that's what he's trying to say at the very end of the play. And we're going to analyze that a bit deeper when we write our paragraphs. But basically, he acknowledges in the very last moments of the play that he was just doing a role. He wasn't actually Prospero. He's just an actor playing Prospero. All right. So these are all the examples of meta-theatricality that we'll notice in the Tempest. Once you've written that out, just a thumbs up. Again, if nothing makes sense or you're confused, just raise your hands, okay? And I can get back to you guys about it. All right, wonderful. That looks really, really good. All right, moving on is now our cultural influences, specifically philosophically and psychologically speaking, okay? So when Shakespeare was writing the play and he started to debate himself about why and how should people rule? So first of all, who should be given the opportunity to rule? Second of all, how should people rule other nations? He started to get very confused and began getting influenced by two very, very important philosophical thinkers of the time, okay? So the first person that we're looking at is Machiavelli. Some of you guys might have already heard of him if you guys did 1984 last term, but Machiavelli is one of my favorite men. So he's the guy on the side here. And he is so iconic because he came up with what we call amoral politics. So what amoral politics basically means is he legitimizes or gives a thumbs up to violence and deception. So he goes, if you want to be successful, politically speaking, do whatever it takes. You want to kill your friends, kill them. You want to kill your parents, kill them. You want to kill an entire country, kill them. If that's what the step you need to take in order to win. So we call him amoral because nothing about his politics is ethically or morally okay. He argues everything opposite to that. Okay, and one of his most iconic quotes that is now embedded into politics literally is the end justifies the means, which basically means if your end result is to become king, do whatever it takes. It's okay. Like kill however many people you want, set fire to the country, burn the entire country down. It doesn't matter as long as you reach your outcome and your goal. Okay. So that's Machiavelli in a nutshell. He's a very evil, but he's a very cool man because not many people give ideas as so. Now, specifically, what had Shakespeare read that influenced him to write as so is Machiavelli's most iconic text, which is called The Prince. And in simple terms, this is what we call a handbook. So it's literally written as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Like there's no paragraphs in the entire book. If you've read it, it's literally like an instruction booklet. Step number 1, step number 2, step number 3. And Machiavelli basically outlines how a person, specifically a prince, can seize, gain, and maintain power. Those are the 3 ideas that he wants to talk about is A, if you're a prince, how can you seize power? 2, how can you then go and gain power? And then 3, how can you go and maintain power? Okay. It's like an instruction booklet. So literally, if you were to ever read it, it's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in the entire book. And some of the very scandalous ideas that Machiavelli wrote about, which I've put it here, is first he goes, a prince wishing to keep his state is often forced to do evil. So if you want to be successful, you have to do evil things. 2, if you're a new prince, so you recently just received power, you have to have a reputation for cruelty. Otherwise, people won't fear you at all. So if you've just gained power, be a bit cruel. That's the only way you can survive. 3, it's safer to be feared than loved. So don't try to love your neighbors and love your, other governments and other people. Try to be more fearful. So try to evoke fear in your audience. And last but not least, if you want to be successful, then you must know how to be, duplicit. So know how to switch between a beast and a man. So what he means here is that sometimes you have to be very evil, but sometimes you also have to sweet talk people. You must know when to change yourself to fit the scenario. All right. Now, these are the most scandalous things that he said in the entire text. And believe it or not, this text was so hated by the British government or like the British people altogether that they burnt it down. Like I think the Vatican City literally burnt all the books, and somehow one copy ended up in the hands of William Shakespeare, and he read it and he was like, wow, this is now going to be the influence behind all my evil characters. So every single villain in Shakespeare's play is a Machiavellian villain, okay? So not just Prospero, but every single villain that you have ever read about in William Shakespeare's plays are all Machiavellian, okay? Please let me know when you've written this out on your end. Just a thumbs up would be great. All right, so 10 more seconds to make sure everyone's on par. Wonderful. All right, awesome. So now how do we see the links to Machiavelli in the Tempest? So I've done all the talking about how it's amoral, it's unethical, etc. But now I'm going to tell you where we notice Machiavellianism in the play itself, okay? So step number 1 is we notice it between the relationship between Antonio and Prospero, okay? So between these 2 men is where we notice, first of all, Machiavellianism. And how do we notice it? Is first of all, if you've read the play, and I'll give you guys a quick backdrop one more time, is Prospero loses his power as a king and as a prince of Milan because he's way too invested in his magical book. So instead of trying to run a kingdom in the start of the play, you come to realize that this man spent his entire time in the kingdom reading a bunch of books. And so people start to hate him. They start going like, you're not really my king. You're not doing anything for me. And what that leads happening is that his kingdom gets stolen by his own brother, okay? So from a Machiavellian point of view, Prospero always says that he was a victim. He was a victim because his brother harmed him. He's a victim because his brother stole the kingdom. But technically what Shakespeare is trying to tell us that from a Machiavellian point of view, Antonio did the right thing, okay? So the brother did the right thing because Prospero wasn't doing a good job of taking care of the kingdom. So Antonio stepped up, took the evil necessary decisions to, betray his own brother and gain power. So from a Machiavellian point of view, what Antonio did to his own brother Prospero is okay because Prospero wasn't doing a good job of being a king in the first place. Okay? So this point right here, Machiavelli would argue that Antonio simply followed the necessary steps to attain the power he wanted. So this is the kind of HSC markers like to hear in their essay. They don't want you to keep writing what every other kid writes in their essay. Every other kid will write about how Prospero was a victim, Prospero was betrayed, and that led him to seek revenge. Like, that's cliche. You have to introduce something new that your HSC markers have not seen often in essays. So in order to make your essay reach that band 6 mark, you want to bring up this argument now that technically, from a Machiavellian point of view, Antonio did nothing wrong. He's right here. And the way that you would justify it is in Act 1, Scene 2, Prospero actually admits to this. So he actually admits and goes, my brother is doing a way better job than what I was doing as a king. So you would justify that argument using a quote from Act 1, Scene 2, which we will when we write our paragraphs. So this is an interesting point to bring up in your essays, that technically Prospero isn't a victim. He let himself reach the stage where his brother had to intervene and betray him to take the kingdom. All right. Does anyone have any questions or like doubts? I know, all good. Just a thumbs up would be great when you've written out this first point about how Antonio and Prospero are our Machiavellian duo. Oh yes, Antonio. Is Antonio the Machiavellian? Oh no, he's not a villain. So it's just he has Machiavellian traits. So we can call it like this. So all right, Antonio embodies Machiavellian traits. So he's not our villain. He's just a guy that has these theories embedded into his characterization. So technically the villain of the play realistically is Prospero. He always did a bad job as a king and then he got banished. Instead of realizing that he was in the wrong, he decides to go seek revenge. So Prospero is our arguable villain here. Right. Does that help, Aditi? Like just when I put it on the top? Yep, awesome. All right, so moving on. The next one is how else do we notice Machiavellianism in the Tempest? Is furthermore is Prospero himself will eventually become a Machiavelli. So he spends the first act of the play crying and yelling and screaming. Again, I'm dramatizing it here about how he's a victim and that his brother shouldn't have done that to him. But later on, he uses the exact same Machiavellian traits and he employs them so that he can go ahead and seek his revenge. Because remember, when he arrives at the island, he is the new leader of the kingdom, and therefore he acts very cruel towards everyone around him so that he can win in his goal of seeking revenge. So Prospero starts off as a victim, and then once he arrives at once he is enacting his revenge plot, he actually uses these Machiavellian methods so that he can win and succeed in his plot for revenge. All right. So what's something very interesting to bring up in your essay is that Shakespeare is technically portraying Prospero as being both a victim and a criminal. So he's both at the same time, depending on which perspective you take. Yes, he's the victim of brother betrayal, but at the same time, he's also a criminal because he exploits everyone on the island just so that he can succeed in his selfish plot for revenge. Okay. And the reason why Shakespeare does that is that he wants to leave audiences with one big moral question, is who are we to decide what is right or wrong? So that's the moral question here. Again, that's the assumption that he leaves us with here. Again, this is a rubric word, remember? So the assumption that he leaves us with is who are we to decide on what clarifies as a right behavior and what clarifies as a wrong behavior, like what defines it. So that's the assumption. Once you've written that out, please let me know. Again, any questions, just unmute yourselves and I can answer it straight away, okay? Wonderful. Awesome. Now, the next philosopher, so this is Machiavelli, he's number one. The second guy that really, really influenced not Machiavelli, who really, really influenced William Shakespeare to write the play and the design behind Caliban specifically, is this man right here, who we call Montaigne, okay? So he's a French philosopher, and when we're looking at this, this philosopher, we are specifically looking at it from Caliban's point of view. So remember, Caliban is that savage, evil-looking, cruel-looking character on the island who's technically just a normal person, okay? Now, Montaigne was a French philosopher, specifically one who would go to native islands, so what we call a statesman. So he would be employed by the French government to go on expeditions to native islands and like literally research about them, like understand their behavior, their cultures, their conventions, the nature of these native people. Okay, and he wrote a very, very sensational essay called Of the Cannibals. Okay, an interesting point to note down is that the name Cannibals influenced the name of Caliban. So Caliban comes from the name Cannibal. So it's meant to, I guess, symbolize here or represent the idea that this man is a cannibal. He's evil, he's sinister, he's a savage. We don't like him. Okay. So the essay that Montaigne wrote was called Of the Cannibals. And now the reason why it was so sensational at the time is because of what theory he came up with, okay? So you would all expect that if a French man leaves France and goes to a native island, he's probably going to write something about how the natives are disgusting, they're feral, they're gross, they're weird, right? Like that's what we would have assumed. He wrote the exact opposite, surprisingly. So what he wrote is that the people living on these islands were actually not savages. So he actually assumed, he challenged this view that British people previously had about native people and that they thought natives were always savages. So what Montaigne actually suggests to us is a theory called cultural relativism. So if you write that down for me and I'll explain what it means. So he challenges the European idea that native people are savages by introducing this idea or this theory called cultural relativism. Okay. Now, what cultural relativism basically means is we as human beings do not have the right to judge any other culture without understanding their cultural context first. So you can't just wake up one morning and go to another cultural country and be like, you guys are stupid because you don't listen to the way I live, right? So what he argues is that the only way we can truly understand if another civilization or group of people are smart or not is to first of all understand their cultural context first. Okay, so cultural relativism is human behavior is a product of culture. Therefore, you cannot judge them without first knowing their culture in the first place. And the way that he came to realize this is he went down to Brazil. So he saw a group of people, again, I'm not pronouncing it. So they were an indigenous tribe from Brazil back then. And at face, people thought that they were barbarians, right? But once he started to spend a lot of time with them, he started to realize that they were quite intelligent. They were dignified. They had their own culture of their own. They had their own system, an own legal system, an own cultural system, religious system as well. So what he came to realize is that, I guess, Europeans just have an easy way of labeling everyone as a barbarian without actually trying to understand their culture. All right. So Montaigne left people with a very sensational outcome at the end of the essay. And he actually wrote at the very, very end of his essay that the native indigenous tribes were actually far more superior than Europeans. That's literally what he ended his entire conclusion with, is he goes, I think after all this studying that the native tribes in all these nations are far more superior intellectually than Europeans. And of course, he was shut down. I don't think he was executed, but he was never allowed to write ever again after this. And that was the end of Montaigne. But this is what influenced Shakespeare to create the character of Caliban, because when we're going to analyze Caliban, you realize that he's not just an idiot. Yes, he looks a bit scary on the outside. He's actually way more smarter than all the other characters in the entire play. All right. Once you've written that out, please let me know. Again, any questions, just unmute yourself and I can answer it away. But as long as you just get the idea that cultural relativism basically means you cannot judge another group of people without first knowing their culture, And Montaigne came up with the idea at the very end that Europeans were actually far stupider than all these native indigenous tribes. All right.